Yeah, recording now. Okay, so welcome back to the CS 199 EMP session. Looks like we got a small crowd today, so we will take things very slowly, I guess, and at the pace that you want to set for the class. And if you want to use the chat feature or the reactions to kind of give me your input as we go along, that will make this more exciting, I think, if you have some engagement. So yeah, let's get into it, I guess. We got 3 things to cover today: function overloading, void returns, and strings. So those are the 3 things. And then you can always follow along on the homepage, and the slides are always on the course website. And I won't do breakout rooms since we have a small crowd. And yeah, let's get into it. First topic to cover is function overloading. So I think you guys covered this last week or yesterday. I don't remember which one. I think it was yesterday, actually. And then this concept is essentially where you have 2 different functions, and they have the same name, but they take in 2 different inputs, or they might have a different way of processing those 2 inputs. So this is kind of the main feature of functions that are overloaded. You have the name, and then you have different inputs in either a different name with either different names or different types or a different order. So if this was maybe float and int and you swap them around, that would be considered function overloading. Yeah, so the other thing to note here is that the return type for these signatures really don't matter when you're considering overloaded functions. So even if the return type changes, as long as these 3 things, the name, the inputs in the name, the inputs names, the inputs types, and the inputs orders don't change, then the functions are pretty much the same in the world of function overloading. Okay, and then in this, I guess this last bullet point is just saying, you know, you can have the same type, the order and number, but different name doesn't really work either. So if you have A and B and L and H, these are 2 different names for these 2, L and H and A and B, but essentially the input type is the same. So these are not considered examples of function overloading. These are just the same function. So really all you need to look at is what are the types of inputs and making sure the name is the same. So you can disregard the return type and you can disregard the name of the input. So that's how you identify function overloading. Do you have any questions? Okay, I'll keep going then. So here's the first practice, function overloading. We're going to overload 2 functions called area that calculate the area of a circle and a triangle. And so this is kind of some starter code, but also this is the equation for the circle, and this is for the triangle. Yeah. So if you want to write those down, and I'll give you the starter code that you need to work on this first problem. And I will do 5 minutes. So it's 6:10 right now. And we will discuss the problem in 5 minutes, so 6:15. 6:16, I guess now. So yeah, if you want to let me know in the chat when you finish the problem, we can just keep going after you're done. Okay, so it's been about 5 minutes, and I'm hoping that you're done. If not, just let me know, and I will give you some more time. Um, all right, so let's go over this question. So I'll just copy this. And all right. So first one, we have to implement the area of a circle. That's 3.14159 times the radius times the radius. That is pretty straightforward, I think. Second one is the triangle, which is just um, base, base times height times depth divided by 2. Okay, so that should be how you do the area of a triangle. So I hope that was very straightforward. So you can see how this is function overloading because they have the same names for the functions. They have different kinds of inputs. This one just takes a double radius. This one takes two doubles. And then they both return doubles. But again, the only things you really need to be looking for are if the names are different, if the names are the same, and they have different types of inputs, essentially. And the input name doesn't really matter, but the number of inputs, the order of the inputs, and the type of the inputs are really what you need to look at for the function overloading. So yeah, that's that question. Now I think that is it for function overloading. If there are any other questions, just let me know in the chat. Or you can unmute yourself, whatever you prefer. If not, let's go ahead and move on to void returns. So void returns was something we also learned about in the same section for function overloading, if I'm not wrong. And they basically exist in the special case when you have a function, but you don't want the function to actually return a value. And in that special case, all you have is the void keyword here for the return type. And then you have the function name, which can be anything, like for example, area. And then you have, whatever input that the function takes and then the code right here. So this is an example of a void function, say my name, which is just going to take on a string and it's going to print out the string, but it will not return anything. So you might wonder, why would you do that? Why would you create a function to do something and not return anything? And this is a key reason why, because you can do things like printing things inside a function. And if functions don't necessarily need to return things in order to be useful in code. So yeah, you can type in a name and then this will print out Jarvis. Whereas, what do you think this piece of code will do? Any ideas on what this line of code will do? Will it run? Will it fail? So we know that this function is void, and so it does not return anything. And if it is void, then that means that, if it doesn't return anything, that means that this println statement can't take anything in order to print something out. So this statement essentially doesn't work. You can't do anything with it. It will give you an error when you try to run this. And similarly, this line of code also will return error because you're trying to assign my name to be something based off of the return value of say my name. But say my name doesn't return anything. It's just printing. And so it'll also fail. So yeah, two things to just keep in mind as you're writing void functions. Um, and then a function where you would use a void return type, like I discussed, would primarily be in these kinds of situations where you want to print something out, or you want to do something to a variable without necessarily getting some sort of an output from it. And as you progress throughout the semester, I think you'll see more and more examples of what I'm talking about. Um, but the main thing at this point will be like printing out statements. So here's some practice on void returns. Yeah, we'll do 5 minutes for this one. I think there's another one after this. Yeah, but that one really shouldn't take that long. So we can do around 10 minutes for this one. And next one we'll go over together. Maybe we'll just walk through that one. So yeah, let's regroup at 6:33. Let me know if you have any questions in the chat. Okay, so I think 10 minutes is about up, so I'm going to keep going. Let's review this problem. So the question asked us to create a function that will print out statements based on two parameters, like EMP and like coding. And if you like both, it should print out, yay, we're so glad you like this class. If you like one or the other, it should print out, oh, which one didn't you like? And if you like neither, it should print out, Daniel, can we do this? Yeah, and then the whole point of this was to see if we could do the syntax for a void function. So void, I'm going to call this function void like EMP and coding. And it will take in two Boolean values like EMP and EMP and Boolean like. So if like EMP and light coding, then I won't print out the whole thing, but you should print out the statement and else if like EMP or like coding, then you should print out the appropriate statement. Okay. And finally, the last case was if you don't like either, so print out. So that pretty much covers all three conditions that we had. I guess I wanted to test this out. EMP and coding, and then we'll just do true. And I'll just use the one, a same thing for the other two conditions. B, C. Just simplify it a little bit. Yeah. So if you have true and true, it'll print out A. If you have one is true and the other is false, you print out B. So this is a little bit of practice on conditionals also. So, you should know at this point how to set up your conditionals for these kinds of problems. Where you have two things liked or, and then neither like. Yeah. So notice that this function doesn't really return anything. Let's look at the second question that I mentioned earlier. We can just walk through it together. It doesn't take that long. So this question asks, can you have a return statement in a function that has a return type of void? In other words, does this function below work? And I'll give you a couple of minutes to take a look at the question or the code. See if this is like valid. Can we have a return? Yeah. Yep. You can have a return statement in a function and it shouldn't have any problems. It just returns here. So if it returns here, it means it exits out of the function at this point. So if I added a print statement here, what happens to it? Well, it doesn't really fail, so I guess I can demonstrate this. And this will run. And give it 1, give it 2. So this just prints out 2 and then it returns. So if it returns at this point, so it gets to here. I'll this A. So it gets to here and then it exits. So if I put this return statement here, it actually never reaches it. Yep. And the compiler catches it like unreachable statement. It basically says you're returning and then you're doing this. So there's like no point in what you're doing. What you could do though, you could of course return here like that and then set up an else statement. And in here, you should be able to print out these. If it's 2, it'll just print out, yes, this is number 2, and then it'll return. If I gave it something like 30, it goes to B, like that. So return just means you're exiting the function. Compiler doesn't like it when you try to put print statements after that. But you can set it up where you can have statements after the return. It has to be kind of an if statement or something like that so that the compiler knows there's some way to reach that piece of code in some other with some other input. Okay, so that is void returns. Now we move on to the wonderful world of strings. Strings are a Java data type. They're just used for anything text related, sequence of characters. So you saw, I think it's chars. I'm not sure how it's pronounced actually, but chars or cars or whatever, however you like to pronounce this piece of text. But they are our first exposure to Java objects, which you'll learn more about in as we progress in the class. But the 2 things to remember about Java objects, like the object data type, is that they encompass 2 different things. One is state and behavior. And this might be something you quizzed on later in the semester. So just remember that it's state and behavior and some form of state and behavior, like synonyms for those 2 words, is what an object is. Yeah, so primary difference between chars beyond the sequence is the double quotes, and you can do fancy things like you can add emojis, you can do different languages at this point, and it just makes your life a whole lot simpler with coding if you have strings accessible to you. Yeah, you can combine them, so much more. So here's some basic methods that you'll see with strings. One is concatenation, of course, which is just adding using the plus sign or the plus operator to combine 2 strings. This will print out, can you call Miss Potts? I think. Okay. If this works. Yep. So it just combines those 2 strings. And then you also see for the first time the use of the dot notation, or the dot notation, I guess. So we saw this previously with arrays, and I think he mentions this in the lecture, but it was a little bit different. Do you remember what this using like the dot length? How different was it compared to the way we find the length of an array? So this is how we find the length of a string. Is the syntax. How would we find the length of an array? So R is the array. If you could find the length, I think by just like by removing the parentheses. Oh my bad, no. Is not followed by white space. Yep. So if you have the parentheses, that's for strings. If you don't have the parentheses, it's for arrays. So this is probably something to just keep in mind because I've seen a lot of students get this mixed up during like quizzes and the MP where they'll put in the parentheses and want to find the length of an array. And the compiler will be like, what are you asking for? I don't know what this is. And yeah, so it just distinguish between how you use those. It'll be helpful when you're trying to debug. And then finally, we also see the use of the new operator, which we also see with arrays. You can create arrays using a new operator. But here is two different ways of creating strings. Using the equal sign and the new operator. So, oh, let me print this out or something. Yeah, all fun and dandy. Okay. All right. So two more things that we learned in the last homework problem. You may or may not have used them. Depends on how you approached it. But these are two methods that are very easily accessible to you from the Java box libraries, and it allows you to do different things with strings, essentially. One is the split method. So the split method, let's see what it does. Okay, so then you have a string called my Marvel superhero. My favorite Marvel superhero is Iron Man, and you split it by this character that you pass in here. So it's splitting up this into pieces essentially based off of the space character that you pass in, and it stores it into this array. And then you can access what's in the array using typical array notation. So you would access the 0, 1, 2, this element in this string using the split operator and then storing it in an array. And then the other method that I think I used substring for homework. Was it yesterday or today? Oh, yeah, I guess it was today's homework. Yeah, so this will basically take, you can pass in two different, so you can pass in an index into substring, and it'll basically go to that index in the string, and it'll take everything from that index until the end of the string, and that's what's stored in the new substring. Alternatively, you can also pass in two different arguments. So like We can also do this until 36. So it'll go from 33 until 36. So this is the beginning index and the ending index. And you can ask it to print that out. So that you just get cat. So yeah, this is a real life example of function overloading, where you have the same name for the function, but it takes in different kinds of parameters, and that changes the output. Okay, so first example of strings of first practice question. We'll do 5 minutes for this one. So it's 6:48 for this one. And if you have access to the slides, you can go ahead and get started on this one too. There's 2 questions. So I would encourage you to work on those 2 for the next 10 minutes. Yeah, go ahead and work on these 2 for the next 10 minutes. And I'll probably stop the timer a little bit earlier than that just because I would like to go over both of the questions and write the solutions to you guys. So try to finish as much as possible before then. Mhm. All right, looks like you're done. So we'll go ahead and quickly review the solutions for this problem. Did you get a chance to look at the second problem also, or did you? No. Just let me know. So this question is slightly more complicated than the other ones, I think. But it's still pretty much on the medium side, I would say. So it asks you to find, basically combine the strings based on the length of the string. So combo string, it takes in two strings and returns a string. Basically, you have to find the string that is longer. And oops. You don't need to. Actually, because you guys haven't covered that, but that is just what I had included in the starter code. B plus A. Wait, was there starter code for this problem? You don't need public then. Okay. B plus A plus B, because B is shorter. And in the other case, you would return A plus C plus A. Yep, so that is combo string. Figure out the length of which one has a greater length, and then use that to print out the result, B plus A plus B and A plus B plus A. So really quickly, this is the second question. We don't have time to pause and do the question. I encourage you to do it in your own time. And the solution is at the end of the slides. If you need me to go over it now, I can. Would you like for me to review this question now? Are you good? It's not a really hard question, honestly. It's just finding this, it's like using the substring essentially. I can show it to you really quickly. I know we're out of time, but let's just really quickly head it out. The question just says, given a string, return a string length 1 from its front, unless its front is false, so this Boolean value is false, in which case return a string length 1 from the back, and the string will always be non-empty. So if it takes in the string hello, it just wants, and the front variable is true, it just wants the first character in the string, and if it's false, then it wants the last character in the string. So because it's based off of the condition or based off of the front variable, we then check if that is true. And if that is true, then you want to return the string substring and the first thing in the string. So this will return when the starting index is 0 and the ending index is 1, but 1 is non-inclusive, so it only returns the first character. And in the other case, you have string. And then you would go from the end of the string, minus 1, string dot length, like so. So this would start at the very end of the string and then continue onwards. This will get the last letter. and there's all sorts of checks on it. Yep, that's the gist of this question. Sorry that I took a little bit longer than usual, but I hope the session was helpful for you. Yeah, thank you for stopping by and have a good day.